The Wyoming Territory's sun blazed merciless and white, turning the parched earth into a furnace that could crack a man's soul. 9-year-old Emma Walsh's screams tore through the desolate plains like a knife through canvas, her small body hurled from the back of a weathered wagon onto the cracked mud beside a bone-dry creek bed. The impact sent dust devils spiraling around her motionless legs that hadn't moved since the accident that killed her father 2 years ago. "You're a bird and die out here with the rest of the worthless things." Vera Walsh's voice cracked like a whip, her face twisted with disgust as she stared down at the child who shared nothing with her but a name. The stepmother's calloused hands gripped the wagon's side knuckles white with the force of her hatred. A small silver locket, the only inheritance from her Cherokee grandmother, caught the light at her throat, a secret she'd spent her life trying to bury. Emma's lips were already cracking in the heat, her throat raw from screaming. Above them, a red-tailed hawk circled with one wing scarred and twisted its cry, echoing Emma's pain as it rode the thermals that shimmered like ghosts above the baked earth. The bird's shadow passed over Emma's face, and she felt the weight of death settling on her chest like a stone. "Please," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind that carried no mercy, only the bitter tang of alkali dust and the promise of a slow, agonizing end. "I ain't done nothing wrong." Vera's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Nothing wrong. Your very existence is wrong, girl. Every breath you take reminds me of him, of what he cost our family." She climbed back onto the wagon seat, her movements jerky with rage. A carved wooden trinket bearing the same symbol as Dixon's watch chain fell from her pocket unnoticed. Should have done this the day he died. The wagon wheels creaked as they turned, carrying Vera away toward the distant line of mountains that marked the horizon. Emma watched until the dust cloud disappeared, leaving her alone with the circling hawk and the vast emptiness that stretched in every direction. Her father's silver locket pressed against her chest, its weight a small comfort against the crushing realization that she would die here, forgotten and abandoned. The creek bed held only cracked mud and the bleached bones of some long-dead animal. Emma dragged herself toward the meager shade of a twisted cottonwood, her useless legs trailing behind her like broken wings. The effort left her gasping, sweat stinging her eyes as she pressed her back against the rough bark. The alkali dust filled her nostrils, bitter and sharp, while the relentless sun beat down on her exposed skin. "Papa," she whispered to the empty sky, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "I'm coming to see you soon." The scarred hawk descended lower, its cry piercing the silence like a judgment from heaven. Emma watched it through blurred vision, wondering if it would be the last thing she ever saw. The bird's damaged wing caught the light, revealing old scars that spoke of survival against impossible odds. For a moment, their eyes met predator and prey, recognizing something in each other that transcended the natural order. Emma Walsh had been born into a world of contradictions she was too young to understand. Her father, Lieutenant Patrick Walsh, had retired from the cavalry 3 years before his death. But retirement hadn't quieted the ghosts that haunted his green eyes. He'd spent his final years on a small homestead outside Bitter Creek, Wyoming, trying to forget the things he'd done in service to a country that demanded blood for progress. Patrick was a man of 41 when he died, tall and lean, with the weathered hands of someone who'd learned to work the land. His dark hair was shot with premature gray, and his eyes held depths that spoke of battles fought and friends lost. He'd been a good soldier once, following orders without question. But the years had taught him that sometimes the right thing and the lawful thing weren't the same. The change in Patrick had come slowly, beginning with small acts of mercy that grew into something larger. A warning to a friendly tribe about an impending patrol. Food left where hungry families might find it. Information passed along that helped people avoid the worst of the Army's attention. He'd even saved a young Lakota warrior from a cavalry bullet, risking his own life to pull the boy to safety. "Why do you help them, Papa?" Emma had asked one morning, watching him load supplies into saddlebags in the pre-dawn darkness. She'd glimpsed the men who came to their door, warriors with braided hair and eyes full of gratitude. Patrick had looked at her with those haunted eyes, then pulled her onto his lap. Because sometimes, little dove, the right thing and the lawful thing ain't the same thing. And a man's got to choose which one he can live with. The railroad's coming through, and some folks think that gives them the right to take what don't belong to them. Emma had been 7 when the accident happened, young enough to trust in her father's strength and wisdom. The morning ride had been a tradition between them, a chance to explore the countryside and talk about the things that mattered. Patrick had saddled his gentle mare Moonbeam and helped Emma climb up behind him. "Hold on tight, little dove," he'd said, his voice warm with affection. "We're going to see what's beyond that ridge." The saddle had given way without warning, sending both riders tumbling to the rocky ground. Patrick's neck had snapped cleanly, killing him instantly. Emma had landed hard on a jagged stone, her spine crushed at the base, leaving her paralyzed from the waist down. What Emma didn't know was that Vera had loosened the cinch deliberately, intending to kill them both. The stepmother had grown tired of Patrick's Indian sympathies, tired of his refusal to embrace the opportunities that wealthy cattle baron Marcus Brennan offered. She'd meant for the accident to look like tragedy, not murder. For 2 years, Vera had cared for Emma with the patience of a spider, slowly poisoning her with Jimson weed mixed into her food. The bitter root weakened Emma's already damaged body, while providing cover for her eventual death. To the world, Vera appeared to be a devoted stepmother, sacrificing her own happiness to care for a burden that wasn't even her own flesh and blood. But Vera's hatred ran deeper than mere convenience. She carried Cherokee blood in her veins, a quarter heritage that she despised with the fury of the damned. Her grandmother had been a Cherokee woman, cast out by her own people for marrying a white trader. The shame of that rejection had been passed down through generations, growing more toxic with each telling. "I ain't no savage," Vera would whisper to herself in the mirror, scrubbing her skin until it bled, fingering the silver locket that was her only link to her grandmother. "I ain't nothing like them." The irony that she'd married a man who secretly aided the very people she hated was a constant source of rage. When her first husband had died in a Lakota raid retribution for his regiment's attack on a peaceful village, Vera's hatred had crystallized into something pure and deadly. She blamed the Indians for everything wrong in her life, for the heritage she couldn't escape, for the respectability that always seemed just out of reach. What she didn't know was that her hatred was shared by someone much closer than she realized. Miles away in the hidden fastness of the Bighorn Mountains, Chief Thunder Cloud felt the weight of leadership pressing down on his shoulders like a physical burden. At 43, he'd been leading his people for nearly a decade, guiding them through the endless cycle of flight and pursuit that had become their existence. Thundercloud was a man shaped by loss and tempered by responsibility. His weathered face bore the deep lines that came from squinting into distances that held both promise and threat. His black hair was streaked with silver and braided with beads that told the story of his deeds, his victories, and his sorrows. He'd been a war chief, once leading raids against the soldiers who burned their villages and scattered their people. But war had taken too much from him. His wife had died in a cavalry attack, shot down while trying to protect their children. His eldest son had fallen in a skirmish with buffalo soldiers, his body left to rot on the prairie. And then there was little Star, his daughter, his heart made flesh. She'd been 7 years old when the soldiers came, bright and curious and full of joy. A trooper's bullet had cut her down as she tried to run, and the part of Thundercloud that had been a father had died with her. "The white man's road is built on the bones of our children," he would tell his warriors around the evening fire smoke from the sacred Kinnickinnick rising toward the stars. But we are still here. We still breathe. We still remember. The Lakota had once been lords of the plains, but now they were hunted, driven from place to place by soldiers who saw them as obstacles to the transcontinental railroad's progress. Thundercloud's band numbered perhaps 100 souls who looked to him for protection in a world that offered little safety. But not all his people were as loyal as they seemed. Young Broken Wing, barely 18 and eager to prove himself, had been making secret trips to the settlements, listening to promises of reward and amnesty from a smooth-talking sheriff who claimed to want peace. The young warrior didn't yet understand that some white men's promises were as empty as the desert wind. Thundercloud had been scouting ahead of his people when he saw the buzzards circling. The sight usually meant death, and death meant potential threat. But something about the scene drew him onward, a sense of wrongness that demanded investigation. He found Emma by the dried creek bed, her small body curled against the cottonwood like a broken doll. She was unconscious, her breathing shallow and rapid, her skin flushed with fever. The scarred hawk circled overhead, its cry piercing the afternoon silence. The bird's damaged wing stirred something deep in Thundercloud's memory. His daughter had once nursed a hawk with a broken wing, caring for it with the patience and tenderness that only children possessed. The bird had stayed near their camp for weeks after its recovery, as if reluctant to leave the girl who had saved its life. "Who are you, little one?" He whispered in Lakota, then repeated the question in English. "Who left you here to die?" Emma's eyes fluttered open, focusing on the face above her with the slow confusion of fever. She saw bronze skin marked with deep lines, black hair braided with beads and feathers, and eyes that held depths of sorrow she couldn't understand. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't hurt me." Thundercloud's heart clenched at the words. "I will not hurt you. I am Thundercloud. What is your name?" "Emma." She managed, her hand moving instinctively to the locket at her throat. "Emma Walsh." The name struck Thundercloud like a physical blow. Patrick Walsh, the green-eyed lieutenant, who had become an unlikely ally, who had saved his son's life during a cavalry raid. The soldier who had chosen compassion over duty, who had warned them about the railroad surveys that would bring more soldiers, more settlers, more death. Patrick Walsh's daughter, Thundercloud, said, and it wasn't a question. Emma's eyes widened with hope. "You knew my papa." "I knew him. He was a good man. He saved my son's life." The hawk cried again, and Thundercloud looked up to see it circling lower. The sight confirmed what his heart already knew. The spirits had brought this child to him, just as they had brought the wounded hawk to his daughter years ago. "The spirits guide her to us," he said, lifting Emma as carefully as he would handle a wounded bird. "I will take you to my people." The ride through the canyon country was a journey through a landscape sculpted by ancient forces. Red rock formations rose like cathedrals from the desert floor, their surfaces carved by wind and water into shapes that suggested faces and symbols older than memory. The air carried the scent of sage and juniper, of dust and distance, and the promise of storms building over the peaks where the railroad surveyors had been spotted the week before. Thundercloud's band had made camp in a hidden valley where springs bubbled up from deep in the earth and cottonwoods provided precious shade. There were perhaps 30 lodges arranged in a circle, with horses grazing in the meadow and children playing in the stream. But the camp was unusually quiet, tension hanging in the air like smoke from a dying fire. The arrival of Thundercloud with a white child in his arms caused a stir that rippled through the camp. Warriors emerged from their lodges, their faces hard with suspicion. Women gathered their children close, whispering in rapid Lakota about the implications of harboring a white child. "Why do you bring her here?" demanded White Owl, the tribe's medicine woman. She was a woman of perhaps 60 winters, her face lined with wisdom and her eyes sharp with intelligence. "The soldiers will follow her trail. The railroad men grow bold, and their protectors grow numerous. She is Patrick Walsh's daughter," Thundercloud said simply. "The soldier who helped us. She was left to die." White Owl's expression softened at the mention of Patrick's name, but her concerns remained. "The spirits may have guided her to us, but she is weak, dying. The poison in her blood runs deep, and the shadow of betrayal hangs over our camp like a storm cloud." "The betrayal," Thundercloud's voice was sharp. "A young Broken Wing has been seen near the settlements," White Owl said quietly. "He speaks of peace, of finding a middle path. But I fear his ears have been filled with honey words that mask bitter intentions." Thundercloud felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. If there was a spy in their camp, bringing Emma here might have sealed all their fates. "Where is Broken Wing now?" he asked. "Been hunting," White Owl replied. "Or so he claims. But the deer do not run toward the white man's towns." Thundercloud looked down at Emma's pale face, then at the scarred hawk that had followed them to the camp. The bird perched on a lodge pole, its bright eyes watching the proceedings with an intelligence that seemed almost human. "Can you help her?" he asked White Owl. The medicine woman studied Emma carefully, her nostrils flaring as she caught the scent of poison. "Jimson weed," she said grimly. "Someone has been giving it to her small amounts over time. It clouds the mind and weakens the body, but it also opens pathways that are usually closed. The mountain spirits work differently than the valley spirits. They do not recognize the white man's rules about what is possible." "Will she live?" "No, that depends on many things," White Owl replied. "On whether the spirits favor her, on whether her will to live is stronger than the poison in her veins. But most of all, it depends on whether we can keep her safe from those who would use her as an excuse for more bloodshed." Swift Arrow Thundercloud's surviving son appeared at his father's side. At 16, he was already a skilled warrior, his left shoulder bearing the puckered scar of a cavalry bullet, a reminder of the day Patrick Walsh had saved his life. But his face was troubled, his eyes darting toward the edge of camp where Broken Wing's lodge stood empty. "Father," he said quietly, "there are things you should know. Broken Wing has been speaking strangely, asking questions about our sacred places, our hiding spots. He says he wants to help our people find peace, but his words taste of deception." Thundercloud's jaw tightened. "What kind of questions?" "About the Box Canyon where we make our final stand when the soldiers come. About the trails that lead to the high country. About which of our people still trust the white man's promises." The implications were clear. If Broken Wing was feeding information to the soldiers, every move they made was being watched, every plan anticipated. And now, with Emma in their camp, the trap was closing around them. "We will watch him," Thundercloud said grimly. "But first we must help this child. She is innocent of her people's crimes, just as Little Star was innocent of ours." The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of fever and healing. Emma drifted in and out of consciousness, while Thundercloud and White Owl worked tirelessly to save her life. They fed her broth made from prairie sage and blessed water, administered teas brewed from echinacea and willow bark, and performed the ancient purification ritual of the sacred smoke. "The spirits speak through the plants," White Owl explained as she worked burning sweetgrass and cedar in a clay bowl, letting the smoke wash over Emma's fevered body. "They tell us which ones heal and which ones harm. Your stepmother chose the ones that harm, but the mountain spirits are stronger than her hatred." During the ceremony, something remarkable happened. The scarred hawk flew down from its perch and landed on Emma's chest, its weight light as a feather. The bird looked directly into her eyes, and for a moment, Emma felt a connection that transcended the physical world. She lifted her hand, trembling with weakness, and gently touched the hawk's scarred wing. "You survived," she whispered. "You healed." The hawk tilted its head, as if understanding her words, then spread its wings and flew away. But something had changed in Emma. A warmth spreading through her body, a sense of connection to something larger than herself. "The spirits have marked her," White Owl said with wonder. "She is chosen protected. But that protection comes with a price. She will be tested, and through her testing, we will all be tested." On the 4th day, Emma's fever broke. She woke wrapped in soft buffalo robes, surrounded by the unfamiliar but comforting sounds of the Lakota camp. Children were laughing somewhere nearby, and she could hear horses moving through grass. But underlying these peaceful sounds was a tension she couldn't quite identify. "You have returned to us," White Owl said, appearing with a bowl of herbal broth. "The spirits have decided you should live." Emma tried to sit up, surprised by the strength in her arms. For months she'd been growing weaker, but now she felt different, not strong, but not dying either. She was somewhere in between, balanced on the edge of possibility. "Where am I?" she asked, though she already knew. "No, you are with the Lakota," White Owl replied. "You are with people who knew your father, who respected him. You are safe for now." The qualification in the medicine woman's words made Emma's heart race. "What do you mean for now?" White Owl hesitated, then spoke carefully. "There are those among the white men who would use your presence here as an excuse for violence. And there are those among our own people who believe that helping you will bring only sorrow." As if summoned by her words, a young warrior appeared in the lodge entrance. Emma recognized him as Broken Wing, though she didn't know his name. His face was smooth and handsome, but his eyes held a shifty quality that made her uncomfortable. "So the white child wakes," he said in English, his accent heavy but understandable. Perhaps it would be better if she had slept forever. "Your Broken Wing." White Owl's voice carried a warning. "These words are not worthy of a Lakota warrior." "Are they not?" Broken Wing stepped into the lodge, his movements casual, but somehow threatening. "This child brings death to our people. Already the soldiers search for her. Already they speak of our savage ways, of how we steal their children." Emma felt a chill at his words. "I don't want to bring you harm," she said quietly. "If my being here puts you in danger, your being here puts us all in danger." Broken Wing interrupted. "But perhaps there is a way to turn danger into opportunity. The white sheriff Dixon is a reasonable man. He speaks of peace, of finding a middle path between our peoples. Perhaps if we were to return you to him with proper ceremony, with proper respect, he might be persuaded to see the Lakota as allies rather than enemies." White Owl's eyes narrowed. "You speak much of this Sheriff Broken Wing. Tell me, what do you know of his reasonableness?" "I know that he offers hope where others offer only war," Broken Wing replied. "I know that he has promised amnesty to any who help bring peace to this territory. I know that he understands the changing times, the coming of the Iron Horse, the need for all peoples to find their place in the new world." Emma felt sick. Something about Broken Wing's words rang false, like a bell with a crack in it. She'd heard similar promises before from Vera, from the men who'd come to her father's house with talk of progress and prosperity. "And what does this sheriff require in return for his promises?" White Owl asked. "Information," Broken Wing said simply. "Knowledge of our movements, our camps, our plans. Not to harm us, but to protect us. To keep us from making mistakes that might provoke the soldiers." "You speak of protection." Thundercloud's voice cut through the lodge like a blade. He'd entered silently, his face dark with anger. "But your words taste of betrayal. Tell me, Broken Wing, what promises has this sheriff made to you personally?" Broken Wing's face flushed. "I think only of our people's welfare." "You think of your own welfare," Thundercloud interrupted. "You think of the gold. They have promised you the safe passage to the reservation, the comfortable life of a government Indian. You think of anything but honor." "Honor." Broken Wing's voice rose. "What honor is there in watching our people starve? What honor is there in running from shadows, in hiding in holes like frightened rabbits? The white man's world is here, whether we like it or not. We can fight it and die, or we can find a way to live in it. And you believe this sheriff will help us find that way?" Thundercloud's voice was deceptively calm. I believe he is our best hope, Broken Wing replied. And I believe this child is the key to unlocking that hope. Emma looked back and forth between the two men, sensing the deep currents of conflict flowing beneath their words. She was the key, the excuse, the justification for whatever was about to happen. The weight of that responsibility was crushing. I won't be used, she said quietly. Not by you, not by anyone. I've been used enough. Broken Wing looked at her with surprise. Child, you do not understand the larger forces at work here. I understand enough. Emma interrupted, her voice growing stronger. I understand that some people will say anything to get what they want. I understand that promises are easy to make and hard to keep. And I understand that my father died because he tried to do what was right, not what was easy. Thundercloud looked at Emma with new respect. The spirits have given you wisdom beyond your years, little one. But wisdom alone will not protect you from those who would use you as a weapon against your chosen people. Then what will? Emma asked. Truth, Thundercloud replied. The truth about who you are, what you've suffered, and what you choose to become. But truth is a dangerous thing. It has a way of destroying those who fear it. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a horse approaching at full gallop. Swift Arrow burst into the lodge, his face flushed with exertion and fear. Father, he gasped. Riders are coming. Many riders armed and moving fast. They fly the flag of the territorial government, but they move like men bent on war. Thundercloud's face went grim. How many? Perhaps 30, led by a man in a sheriff's badge. They have the look of hired guns, not soldiers. And they have tracking dogs. Emma's blood turned to ice. Sheriff Dixon, she whispered. He's found us. Broken Wing's face had gone pale. This is not what he promised, he said, his voice shaking. He said there would be no violence, no bloodshed. He said what you wanted to hear. Thundercloud cut him off. Now you see the truth of white man's promises. Now you understand the price of betrayal. The sound of gunfire erupted outside the lodge, sharp and violent in the morning air. Emma heard men shouting, horses screaming, the thunder of hoofbeats as the camp erupted into chaos. Stay with her, Thundercloud commanded White Owl and Swift Arrow. Keep her safe. I will rally the warriors. But as he moved toward the lodge entrance, Broken Wing blocked his path. Wait, the young warrior said, his voice desperate. Let me talk to them. Let me explain. This doesn't have to end in bloodshed. It ended in bloodshed the moment you opened your mouth to that sheriff. Thundercloud replied coldly. Now step aside or face the consequences of your betrayal. Broken Wing looked around the lodge wildly, his eyes settling on Emma. You, he said, grabbing her arm. You're the one they want. If I bring you to them, if I show them that we're cooperating, let go of me. Emma said, trying to pull away. No, you don't understand. Broken Wing's grip tightened. You're the key to peace. You're the bridge between our worlds. If you come with me willingly, if you tell them how well we've treated you. Swift Arrow's war club caught Broken Wing in the side of the head, sending him crashing to the ground. The only bridge this child will be is one built on truth, not lies, he said grimly. Thundercloud knelt beside Emma, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Can you travel, little one? Can you ride if we help you? Emma nodded, though her heart was hammering with fear. Where will we go? To the high country, Thundercloud replied. To the sacred places where the spirits are strongest. If we must make our stand, we will make it where our ancestors can watch over us. The evacuation was a masterpiece of controlled chaos, the result of years of practice and preparation. The Lakota had learned to pack their lives into bundles that could be carried on horseback, to move like shadows through terrain that would challenge experienced mountaineers. But this time was different. This time, they were running not just from soldiers, but from the consequences of betrayal. Emma was lifted onto a travois, her buffalo robes wrapped tight around her against the cold mountain air. As they fled through the darkness, she could hear the sounds of pursuit, the baying of tracking dogs, the shouts of men who smelled blood on the wind. "They're following us," she said to White Owl, who rode beside her. "Yes," the medicine woman replied. "But they do not know these mountains as we do. They do not understand the power of the sacred places, the protection of the spirits. We go now to the place where the earth touches the sky, where the old ways are strongest." The trail they followed was ancient, worn by countless generations of Lakota, seeking refuge in times of trouble. It was a hard road, steep and treacherous, but it led to places where the white man's world held no sway. As they climbed higher, Emma began to feel sensations in her legs that she hadn't experienced since the accident. It wasn't movement, not yet, but it was something. A tingling warmth that spoke of healing possibilities of spirits that worked by their own rules. "The mountain spirits are strong here," White Owl explained when Emma mentioned the sensations. "They do not recognize the limitations that the white world places on healing. But do not hope too much, child. Sometimes the spirits show us what might be, not what will be." They made camp that night in a high meadow surrounded by peaks that scraped the sky. The air was thin and cold, but the stars seemed close enough to touch. Emma lay in her buffalo robes and stared up at the vast tapestry of light, listening to White Owl tell the ancient stories of the Star People. Long ago. The medicine woman said, her voice carrying the rhythm of centuries. When the world was young and the spirits walked openly among us, there was a great battle between the forces of light and darkness. The Star People fought to keep the light alive, to prevent the darkness from swallowing the world. Some of them fell in that battle, and their spirits became the stars we see now, watching over us, guiding us, reminding us that even in the darkest times, there is light to be found. Emma listened, mesmerized by the story and the way it seemed to speak directly to her situation. She was fighting her own battle between light and darkness, between the hatred that had shaped her early life and the love she'd found among the Lakota. "Will we win?" she asked quietly. "That depends on many things," White Owl replied. "On whether we can hold on to the light when the darkness presses close. On whether we can find the strength to forgive those who have wronged us. On whether we can choose love over hate, even when hate seems easier." The next morning brought disturbing news. Swift Arrow had been scouting their back trail and returned with word that their pursuers were closer than expected. "Dixon has hired men who know these mountains," he reported to his father. "Not just soldiers, but bounty hunters, Indian fighters. They know how to follow a trail through stone and snow. And they're driven by more than duty, they're driven by greed." Thundercloud's face darkened. "How much time do we have? Perhaps half a day if we're lucky. But there's something else, something worse. They have Broken Wing with them." Emma felt sick. "Is he helping them?" "It appears so," Swift Arrow replied grimly. "He's showing them shortcuts, telling them about our defensive positions. The betrayal runs deeper than we thought." Thundercloud was quiet for a long moment, his face showing the weight of leadership, of the burden of making decisions that would affect the lives of everyone in his care. "There is a place," he said finally. "A box canyon in the high country where the walls rise straight up for hundreds of feet. There is only one way in and one way out. But that can be an advantage if we reach it first." "And if we don't?" Emma asked. "Then we make our stand wherever we are," Thundercloud replied. "But it is better to choose the ground of your last battle than to have it chosen for you." The climb to the box canyon was brutal, a nightmare of loose stone and treacherous footing that tested even the hardy mountain ponies. Emma's travois bounced and jolted over the rough terrain, each impact sending shockwaves through her healing body. But she endured, gritting her teeth against the pain and focusing on the goal ahead. As they climbed, the sensations in her legs grew stronger. She could feel her feet when they touched the travois, could sense the movement of muscles that had been dormant for years. It wasn't walking, not yet, but it was hope. "You're healing," White Owl observed during one of their rest stops. "The mountain spirits are pleased with your courage, your willingness to stand with your chosen people against those who would destroy them." "I just don't want anyone to die because of me," Emma said. "Child, you are not responsible for the evil that others do," White Owl replied. "Dixon and his men have chosen their path, just as Broken Wing has chosen his. Your only responsibility is to choose your own path, to decide what kind of person you want to be." They reached the box canyon just as the sun was setting, painting the stone walls in shades of gold and crimson. It was a beautiful place, but also a trap. The canyon was perhaps a quarter-mile long and 100 yards wide, with walls that rose straight up for 300 feet. There was only one entrance, easily defended, but also easily blocked. "If they find us here," Emma said, looking at the narrow entrance, "we'll be trapped." "Yes," Thundercloud agreed. "But they will be trapped too. They cannot use their numbers to advantage in such a narrow space. And there are things about this place that they do not understand, things that may help us." He led them to the far end of the canyon, where a hidden spring bubbled up from the rocks. Above the spring, carved into the stone wall, were ancient pictographs, images of hunters and animals of spirits, and ceremonies of battles fought and won. "This is a sacred place," Thundercloud explained. "My grandfather's grandfather made his vision quest here, received his power from the spirits. It is a place where the barrier between worlds is thin, where the old ways still hold sway." Emma looked at the pictographs, feeling a strange sense of connection to the ancient artists who had carved them. One image in particular caught her attention, a figure that looked like a person with outstretched arms, surrounded by birds. "What does that one mean?" she asked. White Owl studied the image. "It is the symbol of the bridge walker," she said quietly. "One who stands between worlds, who can speak to both sides, who brings understanding where there was only conflict. It is a rare gift and a dangerous one." "Dangerous how?" "Because bridge walkers are often caught in the middle when the two sides clash," White Owl replied. "They are trusted by neither, understood by few, and they must find their own way between the extremes." Emma stared at the pictograph, feeling as though it had been carved specifically for her. She was caught between worlds, between the white society that had rejected her and the Lakota community that had embraced her. She was neither fully one nor the other, but something new, something different. "How do I know which side is right?" she asked. "You don't choose sides," Thundercloud said, joining the conversation. "You choose what is right regardless of which side it helps or hurts. That is the way of the bridge walker." The warriors began preparing their defenses, positioning themselves behind boulders and in niches in the canyon walls. The women and children gathered in the deepest part of the canyon, where the sacred spring would provide water, and the stone walls would offer the most protection. Emma watched the preparations with growing dread. These people were preparing to die, because of her, because of the choices she'd made and the hatred she'd inherited. The weight of that responsibility was almost unbearable. "I should go to them," she said to White Owl. "I should end this before it starts." "And do you think that would end it?" the medicine woman asked. "Do you think Dixon's greed would be satisfied with just you? Do you think the railroad men would stop their surveys, the settlers would stop their encroachments, the government would stop its policies? You are not the cause of this conflict, child. You are simply the excuse they are using today." Emma knew White Owl was right. But the guilt remained. She had become the symbol of everything that was wrong between the races, the justification for violence that had been brewing for decades. The attack came at dawn as the first light was painting the canyon walls in shades of pink and gold. Emma woke to the sound of gunfire, echoing off the stone, the sharp crack of rifles mixing with the war cries of the defenders. She pulled herself to a crevice in the rock wall and peered out at the canyon entrance. Dixon's men had taken positions behind boulders and fallen logs, their rifles trained on the narrow opening. But they seemed hesitant to advance, aware that the confined space would make them vulnerable to the defenders above. It was a standoff, but one that couldn't last forever. Emma Walsh. Dixon's voice boomed through the canyon, echoing off the stone walls. "I know you can hear me, girl. Come on out and let's end this peaceful like—" Emma felt her heart racing. She could see Dixon now, a tall man with steel-gray hair and cold eyes, his sheriff's badge glinting in the morning sun. Behind him stood at least 20 men, all armed with rifles and pistols, their faces hard with the look of professional killers. And there, standing beside Dixon with his head hung in shame, was Broken Wing. The young warrior looked up at the canyon walls, his eyes searching for Emma's face. When their gazes met, she saw the regret and desperation in his expression. "She's up there." Broken Wing called out, his voice carrying clearly in the thin air. "Please, you promised no one would be hurt. You said if I brought you here, if I showed you the way, there would be no violence." Dixon's laugh was harsh and mocking. "Did I? Well, plans change, boy, especially when the stakes are this high." Emma watched in horror as Dixon drew his pistol and placed it against Broken Wing's head. "You see, I never intended to keep my promises to a savage. But you've been useful, I'll give you that. You've led us right to the heart of the nest." "Nos." Broken Wing's voice cracked with terror. "You can't." The gunshot echoed through the canyon like thunder, and Broken Wing crumpled to the ground, his blood seeping into the rocky soil. Emma bit back a scream, her hand flying to her mouth in shock and horror. "Or that's the price of betrayal," Dixon called out to the canyon walls. "Now, Emma Walsh, you come on down here before I decide to make examples of the rest of these savages." Emma felt Thundercloud's hand on her shoulder, pulling her back from the edge. "He is a man without honor," the chief said quietly. "His words are poison, his promises are lies. Do not let his cruelty break your spirit." But Emma was already moving her mind, working with a clarity born of desperate determination. She had seen enough death, enough suffering caused by the hatred and greed of people like Dixon and Vera. It was time to end this, but not the way Dixon expected. "I'm going out there," she said, struggling to stand with the aid of her crude crutches. "No," Thundercloud said firmly. "I will not let you sacrifice yourself for us." "I'm not sacrificing myself," Emma replied, her voice growing stronger. "I'm choosing my own path. I'm choosing to be a bridge walker." She began making her way toward the canyon entrance, her crutches clicking against the stone. Behind her, she could hear Thundercloud and the others arguing in rapid Lakota, but she didn't look back. She had made her choice. "I hold your fire," she called out as she emerged from the shadows. "I'm coming out." Dixon's men raised their rifles, but the sheriff held up his hand. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "The little cripple girl alive and well. We've been so worried about you, Emma. Your poor stepmother has been beside herself with grief." Emma stood at the canyon entrance, supported by her crutches, her father's silver locket gleaming at her throat. "My stepmother is the one who left me to die in the desert," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the canyon. "She's the one who's been poisoning me for 2 years. Dixon's eyes narrowed. "Now that's a serious accusation, girl. You sure that fever didn't scramble your brains?" "I'm sure," Emma replied. "Just like I'm sure you and Vera are working together. Just like I'm sure you're the one who's been planning to steal the tribal lands for your eastern investors." A murmur ran through Dixon's men at her words. Some of them were local men hired guns who didn't know the full extent of Dixon's corruption. They were beginning to understand that they weren't just tracking a kidnapped child. They were part of a much larger conspiracy. "You don't know what you're talking about," Dixon said, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. "Don't I?" Emma reached into her shirt and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is a letter from my father to a government official in Washington. It details everything: your meetings with Vera, your plans to frame the Lakota for crimes they didn't commit, your scheme to seize their land for the railroad." Dixon's face went pale. "That's impossible. All of Walsh's papers were destroyed in the fire." "No, what fire?" Emma asked innocently. "You mean the fire that hasn't happened yet, the fire you're planning to set to cover your tracks?" Dixon realized his mistake too late. His admission that he knew about papers that supposedly didn't exist was proof of his involvement in the conspiracy. Several of his men were looking at him with suspicion, now beginning to understand that they'd been lied to. "You're a clever little thing," Dixon said, his voice turning ugly. "But cleverness won't save you now. Hand over that letter, and maybe I'll make your death quick." "No," Emma said simply. "I don't think I will." Dixon raised his pistol, but before he could fire, chaos erupted around him. Thundercloud and his warriors had used Emma's distraction to move into position, and now they struck with deadly precision. Swift Arrow's rifle cracked from the canyon wall, and one of Dixon's men spun and fell. White Owl, despite her age, moved like a shadow among the rocks, her knife finding its mark with surgical precision. The other warriors followed their example, turning the canyon entrance into a killing ground. But Dixon was a survivor, and he had more men than the Lakota. The battle quickly devolved into a close-quarters fight, with both sides taking casualties. Emma found herself caught in the middle, trying to stay alive, while men died around her. "Get behind me!" Thundercloud shouted, fighting his way toward her. His war club crushed the skull of a gunman who was trying to reload, and his knife opened the throat of another who tried to flank him. But there were too many of them. For every man that fell, two more seemed to take his place. Dixon's voice could be heard above the gunfire, screaming orders and threats in equal measure. "Kill them all," he yelled. "Every last savage, and bring me that girl alive." Emma saw Thundercloud stumble, blood streaming from a wound in his shoulder. Swift Arrow was pinned down behind a boulder, his ammunition running low. The Lakota were fighting with the desperation of trapped animals, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. That's when Emma remembered the pictograph, the image of the bridge walker surrounded by birds. She looked up at the canyon wall, searching for the scarred hawk that had been her constant companion. There it was, circling high above the battle, its cry piercing the air like a battle song. "Stop!" Emma shouted, her voice somehow carrying above the gunfire. "Stop this madness!" To her surprise, both sides paused, weapons still raised, but fingers hesitating on triggers. In that moment of silence, Emma's voice rang out clear and strong. "You want to know the truth?" she called out. "You want to know what really happened? Then listen." She began to speak her words, carrying the weight of truth and the power of someone who had nothing left to lose. She told them about Vera's poisoning, about the loosened saddle cinch that had killed her father, about the conspiracy to steal the tribal lands. She told them about the kindness she'd found among the Lakota, about the healing that had begun in her body and her spirit. "These people saved my life," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "They could have left me to die, could have seen me as an enemy. Instead, they chose compassion. They chose to heal rather than harm." Some of Dixon's men were lowering their weapons, uncertainty written on their faces. They had signed on to rescue a kidnapped child, not to participate in genocide. "Don't listen to her," Dixon screamed. "She's been brainwashed by the savages. She doesn't know what she's saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying," Emma replied. "I'm saying that you're a liar and a murderer. I'm saying that you killed Broken Wing in cold blood, even though he helped you. I'm saying that you're planning to kill me too as soon as you get what you want." Dixon's face twisted with rage. "Enough!" he snarled, raising his pistol. "You've caused me enough trouble." But as he pulled the trigger, Thundercloud threw himself between Emma and the bullet. The shot took him in the chest, and he crumpled to the ground, his blood spreading across the rocky soil. "No!" Emma screamed, dropping her crutches and falling to her knees beside him. "No, no, no." Thundercloud's eyes were growing dim, but he managed to focus on her face. "Little one," he whispered. You must live. You must tell the world." "Don't leave me," Emma sobbed. "Please don't leave me." "Not leaving, Thundercloud," said his voice barely audible. "Never leaving, always with you, in your heart." His eyes closed, and Emma felt the last breath leave his body. The man who had saved her life, who had become like a father to her, was dead. And she was alone. But she wasn't alone. Swift Arrow was beside her, his own wounds forgotten in his grief. White Owl was there too, her face streaked with tears as she began to sing the death song for her fallen chief. And above them all, the scarred hawk circled its cry, echoing off the canyon walls like a lament for the dead. Emma felt something breaking inside her, but it wasn't her spirit. It was the last chain that bound her to her old life, the last vestige of the frightened, helpless child she had been. In its place rose something new, something forged in the fires of loss and tempered by the strength of those who had believed in her. "You killed him," she said, her voice deadly quiet as she looked up at Dixon. "You killed the best man I ever knew." Dixon laughed, but there was no humor in it. "And I'll kill you too, girl. But first I think I'll kill a few more of your savage friends, starting with that boy there." He swung his pistol toward Swift Arrow, but Emma was already moving. The sensations in her legs had been growing stronger throughout the battle, and now driven by rage and desperation, she found the strength to stand. It wasn't walking, not yet, but it was movement. She lunged forward, her hands closing around a fallen warrior's knife, and drove the blade into Dixon's leg. The sheriff screamed and stumbled, his shot going wide. Emma rolled away the knife still in her hand as Dixon turned his pistol toward her. "You little witch," he snarled. "I'll gut you like a fish." But before he could fire, Swift Arrow's arrow took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. The young warrior had found his bow, and his aim was true. Dixon fell to his knees, his pistol skittering away across the rocks. Emma pulled herself toward him, the knife still in her hand, her face set with determination. "It's over," she said. "The killing stops now." Dixon looked up at her, his face twisted with pain and hatred. You think killing me will change anything? There are others who want this land. The railroad, the investors. They won't stop just because one sheriff dies." "Maybe not," Emma said. "But they'll have to find another excuse, another lie to justify their greed." She raised the knife, and Dixon's eyes widened with fear. "Wait," he gasped. "Wait, please. I can give you information, names, places, documents. I can expose the whole conspiracy." Emma hesitated, the knife trembling in her hand. Part of her wanted to kill him to make him pay for Thundercloud's death. But another part, the part that had been shaped by the chief's teachings, told her that killing wouldn't bring Thundercloud back. "Talk," she said finally. "Tell me everything." Dixon's confession poured out like water from a broken dam. He named names, revealed locations, exposed the full extent of the conspiracy that reached from the territorial government all the way to Washington. Emma listened, memorizing every detail, while Swift Arrow and the surviving warriors kept watch. When Dixon finished, Emma looked around at the carnage that surrounded them. Too many good people had died because of one man's greed and hatred. Too much blood had been spilled on the sacred ground of the canyon. Swift arrow. She said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. Take the others and go. Get to safety. I'll stay here and make sure Dixon faces justice. I won't leave you, Swift Arrow said firmly. My father died protecting you. I won't abandon that duty. Emma looked at the young warrior, seeing so much of Thundercloud in his face. Your father died protecting all of us, she said. Now it's your turn to protect the people. Get them to safety, Swift Arrow. That's what Thundercloud would want. Swift Arrow hesitated, then nodded. What about you? I have work to do, Emma said. Bridgewalker work. I have to make sure the truth gets told, that the corruption gets exposed. I have to make sure Thundercloud's death means something. As the survivors prepared to leave, White Owl approached Emma. The medicine woman's face was lined with grief, but her eyes held a strange light. The spirits spoke to me during the battle, she said quietly. They showed me a vision of the future. I saw you walking, Emma. Not just with your legs, but with your heart. I saw you building bridges between worlds, healing wounds that have festered for generations. I can't even walk now, Emma said, looking down at her useless legs. Can't you? White Owl asked. You stood during the battle. You moved when you needed to. The healing is happening slowly, but surely. The mountain spirits are not bound by the white man's understanding of what is possible. Emma looked down at her legs, concentrating. She could feel them now, could sense the muscles and nerves that had been dormant for so long. It wasn't full sensation, but it was more than she'd had in years. Trust in the spirits, White Owl said. Trust in yourself, and trust in the power of the Bridgewalker to heal what has been broken. As the Lakota departed, Emma found herself alone with Dixon and the dead. The sheriff was barely conscious, his wounds severe, but not fatal. She would have to get him to medical attention soon, but first she had something to do. Emma made her way to Thundercloud's body, her legs trembling with the effort but supporting her weight. She knelt beside the fallen chief, her hands gentle as she closed his eyes. I promise you, she whispered. I promise that your death will not be in vain. I'll make sure the truth gets told. I'll make sure your people are safe. I'll be the bridge you believed I could be. The scarred hawk landed on Thundercloud's chest, its head bowed, as if in mourning. Emma reached out and touched its feathers, feeling the life and strength that flowed through its small body. You survived, she said to the bird. You healed. You found a way to fly again. Help me do the same. The hawk looked at her with bright, intelligent eyes, then spread its wings and took flight. Emma watched it soar above the canyon, its cry echoing off the walls like a song of freedom. She spent the rest of the day tending to Dixon's wounds and preparing Thundercloud's body for burial. It was sacred work that honored the dead and prepared the living for what was to come. As night fell, Emma found that she could stand for longer periods, could take halting steps with the aid of her crutches. The healing was accelerating, driven by her determination to fulfill her promise to Thundercloud. How? Dixon asked weakly when he saw her moving. How are you walking? Faith, Emma said simply. Faith in the power of spirits that don't recognize the limitations of the white man's world. Faith in the healing power of love and purpose. Dixon laughed bitterly. Spirits, you really have been brainwashed by the savages. If believing in compassion and healing makes me brainwashed, Emma replied, then I'm proud to be brainwashed. It's better than being corrupted by greed and hatred. The next morning, Emma began the long journey back to civilization. She had fashioned a crude travois for Dixon, determined to bring him back alive to face justice. Her own movement was slow but steady, her legs growing stronger with each step. It took them 3 days to reach the nearest settlement, a small town called Cedar Ridge. Emma's arrival caused quite a stir, a young girl supposedly kidnapped by Indians returning on foot with a wounded sheriff, and a story that would shake the territory to its foundations. The local doctor treated Dixon's wounds while Emma told her story to the town marshal. She held nothing back, revealing the full extent of the conspiracy, naming names, and providing details that could be verified. "This is quite a tale, miss," the marshal said when she finished. "But you understand, we'll need proof. We'll need evidence." Emma smiled and reached into her shirt, pulling out the letters and documents she had taken from her father's hiding place. "I have proof," she said. "Letters, financial records, correspondence with government officials. Everything you need to expose the conspiracy." The marshal's eyes widened as he examined the documents. "My God," he whispered. "This goes all the way to Washington. This is huge." "It's the truth," Emma said simply. "And the truth needs to be told." The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Federal marshals arrived within days, armed with warrants and authority to act. Dixon's co-conspirators were arrested, and their assets seized, their schemes exposed to the harsh light of justice. Vera Walsh was found dead in her home, apparently by her own hand, unable to face the shame of exposure. Marcus Brennan fled the territory, his cattle empire crumbling as his involvement in the conspiracy became known. But the real victory was quieter, more personal. Emma's story, told in newspapers across the country, began to change minds and hearts. People began to question the official narrative about Indian conflicts, to wonder if there might be another side to the story. Emma herself became a symbol of hope and healing, proof that bridges could be built between cultures, that understanding was possible even in the darkest times. She used her newfound fame to advocate for native rights, to push for fair treatment of displaced tribes. And slowly, miraculously, her legs grew stronger. Within a year, she was walking with only a slight limp, her body healing as her spirit had healed. The doctors called it impossible, but Emma knew better. She had been touched by the mountain spirits, blessed by the love of people who had seen past her skin color to the heart beneath. She never returned to live full-time with the Lakota, but she visited often, maintaining the bonds that had saved her life. Swift Arrow grew into a wise leader, carrying on his father's legacy of protection and guidance. White Owl continued her healing work, training new generations of medicine people. And always, the Scarred Hawk was there, appearing at moments of crisis or joy, a reminder of the connection between all living things, the power of survival and renewal. Emma lived to be 73, her life, spanning the transformation of the American West from a place of violence and exploitation to one of gradual reconciliation and understanding. She established schools that taught both white and native children, created programs that preserved tribal languages and customs, and worked tirelessly to build the bridges that Thundercloud had envisioned. She never married, choosing instead to dedicate her life to the cause of peace and understanding. Her autobiography, Walking Between Worlds, became a bestseller and helped to change public perceptions about Native peoples. When Emma died, representatives from dozens of tribes attended her funeral, along with government officials, educators, and ordinary people whose lives had been touched by her work. She was buried in the hidden valley where Thundercloud's people had made their home, her grave, marked by a simple stone that bore the symbol of the bridge walker. The Scarred Hawk appeared one last time, circling overhead as Emma was laid to rest. It landed on her grave marker for a moment, as if paying its respects, then flew away into the mountains, where Thundercloud's descendants still lived free. Emma's legacy lived on in the lives she had touched, the bridges she had built, the understanding she had fostered between peoples who had once been enemies. The valley where she was buried became a place of pilgrimage, where people came to remember the power of love over hate, understanding over ignorance, healing over harm. And sometimes on clear autumn days, when the leaves turned gold and the mountain air was crisp with promise, Visitors to the valley would see a red-tailed hawk circling overhead, its wings healed and strong, soaring free. Above the land, where a paralyzed girl had learned to walk again, where a bridge walker had shown the world that the strongest bonds are forged not by blood or race, but by choice and love. The circle was complete. The story was told. The legacy lived on. In the end, Emma Walsh had become exactly what Thundercloud had seen in her. From the beginning, a bridge between worlds, a healer of wounded hearts, a living proof that the human capacity for compassion could overcome any obstacle. She had taken the hatred that had been poured upon her and transformed it into love, taken the poison that had been fed to her and turned it into medicine, taken the abandonment that had been her birthright and made it into belonging. She had been thrown away, but she had been found. She had been broken, but she had been healed. She had been alone, but she had found family. And in finding herself, she had helped others find their way as well. The strongest bonds, as Thundercloud had taught her, were indeed forged by choice. And Emma Walsh had chosen love over hate, hope over despair, unity over division. In making that choice, she had not only saved herself, she had helped save the world.